Hi everybody, I am going to talk about autism. Autistic spectrum disorders refer to a group of neuropsychiatric disorders with a specific delay and deviance in social, communicative and cognitive development. They include autism, Asperger's syndrome and pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. Autism is one of the 5 developmental disorders included under the umbrella of the pervasive developmental disorders. In addition to autism, other disorders in this group are Asperger's syndrome, Rett's disorder, childhood disintegrative disorder, and when full criteria for one of these disorders are not met, a child may be diagnosed with pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, often written as PDD-NOS. Autism is characterized by deficits in social interaction and communication and unusual and repetitive behavior. Cognitive abilities in people with autism vary between those with average to above average intelligence to borderline and mild mental retardation, and others who function within the moderate to profoundly mentally retarded range. Autism, which is a frequent handicapping condition, manifests at birth or within the first 2.5 years of life. Individuals living with autistic spectrum disorders are socially deprived of the access to human rights, inclusion, communication, basic facilities such as healthcare, education, and employment in the general scenario. Given the magnitude of the problem, it is important that autistic spectrum disorders in persons must receive greater socio-economic and political attention. Social workers engaged in creating change among the individuals are expected to ensure knowledge about adequate services available to those individuals living with these autistic spectrum disorders for their inclusion. At the end of this talk, you will gain an adequate knowledge about the meaning of autism and autistic spectrum disorders, understand the causes of autism, and learn the management of autism. Let me describe the meaning of autism. Autistic disorder is a full syndrome within the autism spectrum. It is often abbreviated to autism. Most people with autism also have a learning disability. Yet, even persons with average intelligence may have autism. This is often referred to as high-functioning autism or a high-functioning person with autism, which is a more correct term. Autism spectrum disorder is characterized by persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts and restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. Symptoms must be present in the early developmental period, typically recognized in the first 2 years of life. Symptoms cause clinically significant impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of current functioning. The autism spectrum disorder is an umbrella term for many assessments with similar symptoms. The term spectrum refers to the wide range of symptoms, skills, and levels of impairment or disability that children with autism spectrum disorder can have. Some children are mildly impaired by their symptoms, while others are severely disabled. The latest edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders no longer includes Asperger's syndrome, and the characteristics of Asperger's syndrome are included within the broader category of autism spectrum disorder. Pervasive developmental disorder, also known as not otherwise specified or atypical autism, are often used as synonyms. These assessments mean that the person does not fulfill all the criteria for autism or Asperger's syndrome, but nonetheless has serious difficulties of a similar nature. Childhood disintegrative disorder is very rare and means that a child develops autism after the age of 2 to 3 years of age. The child has a normal development until this age. Let me outline the causes of autistic spectrum disorders. Scientists do not know the exact causes of autism spectrum disorders, but research suggests that both genes and environment play an important role. Genetic factors are responsible. In identical twins who share the exact same genetic code, if one has autism spectrum disorder, the other twin also has the same disorder in nearly 9 out of 10 cases. If one sibling has autism, the other siblings have 35 times the normal risk of also developing the disorder. Researchers are starting to identify particular genes that may increase the risk for autism. However, most people who develop autism do not have any family history of autism, suggesting that random, rare, and possibly many gene mutations are likely to affect a person's risk. Any change to normal genetic information is called a mutation. Mutations can be inherited, but some arise for no reason. Mutations can be helpful, harmful, or have no effect. Having an increased genetic risk does not mean that a child will definitely develop autism. Many researchers are focusing on how various genes interact with each other as well as with environmental factors to understand better how they increase the risk of this disorder. Let me mention about the environmental factors. In medicine, environment refers to anything outside of the body that can affect health. This includes the air we breathe, the water we drink and bathe in, the food we eat, the medicines we take, and many other things that our bodies may come in contact with. Environment also includes our surroundings in the womb, when our mother's health directly affects our growth and earliest development. Researchers are studying many environmental factors such as family medical condition, parental age and other demographic factors, exposure to toxins and complications during birth or pregnancy. As with the genes, it is likely that more than one environmental factor is involved in increasing the risk for autism. And like genes, any one of these risk factors raises the risk by only a small amount. Most people who have been exposed to environmental risk factors do not develop autism. The National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences is also conducting research in this area. Scientists are studying how certain environmental factors may affect certain genes, turning them on or off, or increasing or decreasing their normal activity. This process is called epigenetics and is providing researchers with many new ways to study how disorders like autism develop and possibly change over time. Health experts recommend that children receive a number of vaccines early in their life to protect against dangerous and infectious diseases like measles. Since pediatricians in the United States started giving these vaccines during regular checkups, the number of children getting sick, becoming disabled, or dying from these diseases has dropped to almost zero. Children in the United States receive several vaccines during their first 2 years of life, around the same age that symptoms of autism spectrum disorder often appear or become noticeable. A minority of parents suspect that the vaccines are somehow related to their child's disorder. Some may be concerned about these vaccines due to the unproven theory that autism may be caused by thimerosal. Thimerosal is a mercury-based chemical once added to some but not all vaccines to help extend their shelf life. However, except for some flu vaccines, no vaccine routinely given to preschool-aged children in the United States has contained thimerosal since 2001. Despite this change, the rate of children diagnosed with autism has continued to rise. Other parents believe their children's illness might be linked to vaccines designed to protect against more than one disease, such as the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, which never contained thimerosal. Many studies have been conducted to try to determine if vaccines are a possible cause of autism. Till 2010, none of the studies has linked autism and vaccines. Let me state the early signs and symptoms of autism spectrum disorder. Symptoms of autism spectrum disorder vary from one child to another, but in general, they fall into two areas, namely social impairment, including difficulties with the social communication, and repetitive and stereotyped behaviors. Children with autism do not follow typical patterns when developing social and social communication skills. Parents are usually the first to notice unusual behavior in their child. Often, certain behavior becomes more noticeable when compared with other children of the same age. In some cases, babies with autism may seem different very early in their development. Even before their first birthday, some babies become overly focused on certain objects, rarely make eye contact, and fail to engage in typical back and forth play and babbling with their parents. Other children may develop normally until the second or even third year of life, but then they start to lose interest in others and become silent, withdrawn, or indifferent to social signals. Loss or reversal of normal development is called regression, which occurs in some children with autism. Most children with autism have trouble regarding engaging in everyday social interactions. For example, some children may make little eye contact, tend to look and listen less to people in their environment, or fail to respond to other people, rarely seek to share their enjoyment of toys or activities by pointing or showing things to others, and respond unusually when others show anger, distress, or affection. Recent research suggests that children do not respond to emotional cues in human social interactions because they may not pay attention to the social cues that others typically notice. For example, one study found that children focus on the mouth of the person speaking to them instead of on the eyes, which is where children with typical development tend to focus. A related study showed that children with autism appear to be drawn to repetitive movements linked to a sound, such as hand clapping during a game of pat cake. More research is needed to confirm these findings, but such studies suggest that children with autism may misread or not notice subtle social cues such as a smile, a wink, or a grimace that could help them understand social relationships and interactions. Without the ability to interpret another person's tone of voice as well as gestures, facial expressions, and other nonverbal communications, children with autism may not properly respond. Likewise, it can be hard for others to understand the body language of children with autism. Their facial expressions, movements, and gestures are often vague or do not match what they are saying. Their tone of voice may not reflect their actual feelings either. Many older children with autism speak with an unusual tone of voice and may sound sing-song or flat and robot-like. Children with autism also may have trouble understanding another person's point of view. For example, by school age, most children understand that other people have different information, feelings, and goals than they have. Children with autism may lack this understanding, leaving them unable to predict or understand other people's actions. Let me mention about the communication issues related to children with autism. According to the developmental milestones, by the first birthday, typical toddlers can say one or two words, turn when they hear their name, and point when they want a toy. When offered something they do not want, toddlers make it clear with the words, gestures, or facial expressions that the answer is no. But for children with autism, reaching such milestones may not be so straightforward. For example, some children with autism may fail or be slow to respond to their name or other verbal attempts to gain their attention, fail to develop gestures such as pointing and showing things to others, coo and babble in the first year of life but then stop doing so, develop language at a delayed pace, learn to communicate using pictures or their own sign language, speak only in single words or repeat certain phrases over and over, seeming unable to combine words into meaningful sentences, repeat words or phrases that they hear, and use words that seem odd, out of place, or have a special meaning known only to those familiar with a child's way of communicating. Even children with autism who have relatively good language skills often have difficulties with the back and forth of conversations. For example, because they find it difficult to understand and react to social cues, some highly verbal children with autism often talk at length about their favorite subject, but they won't allow anyone else a chance to respond or notice when others react differently. Children with autism who have not yet developed meaningful gestures or language may simply scream or grab or otherwise act out until they are taught better ways to express their needs. As these children grow up, they can become aware of their difficulty in understanding others and in being understood. This awareness may cause them to become anxious or depressed. Let me outline the repetitive and stereotyped behavior of children with autism. Children with autism often have repetitive motions or unusual behaviors. These behaviors may be extreme and very noticeable, or they can be mild and discreet. For example, some children may repeatedly flap their arms or walk in specific patterns, while others may subtly move their fingers by their eyes, in what looks to be a gesture. These repetitive actions are sometimes called stereotypy or stereotyped behaviors. These children tend to have overly focused interests. They may become fascinated with moving objects or parts of objects like the wheels on a moving car. They might spend a long time lining up toys in a certain way rather than playing with them. They may also become very upset if someone accidentally moves one of the toys. Repetitive behavior can also take the form of a persistent, intense preoccupation. For example, they might be obsessed with learning all about vacuum cleaner, train schedules, or lighthouses. These children often have great interest in numbers, symbols, or science topics. While children with autism often do best with routine in their daily activities and surroundings, inflexibility may often be extreme and cause serious difficulties. They may insist on eating the same exact meals every day or taking the same exact route to school. A slight change in a specific routine can be extremely upsetting. Some children may even have emotional outbursts, especially when feeling angry or frustrated or when placed in a new or stimulating environment. Let me discuss about the assessment or diagnosis of autism. If healthcare professionals are aware of the criteria for the assessment of autism, they can diagnose autism in a child as early as 18 months old. The diagnostic tools most commonly used in India at present are the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, 4th edition, and the International Classification of Diseases, 10th edition, which have aligned their criteria for the pervasive developmental disorders. The most important information one can gather to assist in formulating an assessment of autism relates to the child's development in the areas most impacted by the disorder, namely communication, socialization, and restrictive and repetitive behaviors. There are certain behaviors and features that tend to be more common, and they serve as indicators of identifying autism. A child with autism may prefer to be alone, appear unaware of other people's existence, not respond to name, and may on occasion appear to be deaf, appear to avoid gaze or show unusual eye contact, not seek comforting even when hurt or ill, not smile in response to parents' face or smile, have difficulty in mixing and playing with other children. The child may not point to, share, or indicate interest or not share in others' interests, and not try to attract attention to his or her own activity. The child may not look at a toy across the room when an adult points at it. The child may not imitate adults' actions but have extreme unusual fears or have poor awareness of danger or not show fear. The child may show delay or lack of language development or loss of early acquired language. The child may rarely or not at all use gestures to communicate. He or she may lead adults by the arm to have needs met or use adult hand as an object. The child may echo words or phrases and have difficulty in initiating and sustaining conversation. The child may enjoy rotating or spinning objects or lining up objects and be occupied with parts of objects like knobs, switches, wheels, and may show apparent insensitivity to pain. The child may like sameness in everyday routines and may show resistance to change in routines or surroundings. The child may display repetitive actions and ask repetitive questions. He or she may display unusual behavior or body movement such as spinning, hand flapping, head banging, or rocking, and show extreme distress for no apparent reason. The child may appear unaware of distress in others and display good rote memory for nursery rhymes, commercial jingles, and irrelevant facts. Traditionally, an assessment of autism is to be made by a team comprising a psychiatrist, psychologist, special educator, and so on. But by and large, assessment in India is made by a single individual who may be a pediatrician, clinical or developmental psychologist, special educator, or speech therapist with extensive experience working with autistic children, psychiatrist, or a professional involved in providing medical or rehabilitative care or training. Since the purpose of assessment is to ensure that the child receives the intervention that will address its needs, it is considered appropriate that the child receives proper assessment from any source that results in appropriate intervention without loss of time. Let me talk about the intervention for children affected by autism. Children with autism can make significant gains through educational intervention, and particularly when the intervention is early. Early intervention has shown the result that the child would need fewer special education and other allied services later in life. The concept of early intervention in India is still in its infancy. Such intervention relies on a chain of events which at the current time is lacking. In other words, parents must identify some atypical behavior in their child and bring it to the attention of a pediatrician or their health worker. The pediatrician must identify the behaviors as possible symptoms of autism rather than a merely delayed development, a typical development, or another disorder. The pediatrician must also know of a referral to provide the parent. Let me sum up. Autistic disorder is a full syndrome within the autism spectrum. It is characterized by deficits in social interaction and communication and unusual and repetitive behavior. Scientists do not know the exact causes of autism spectrum disorder, but research suggests that both genes and environment play an important role. Symptoms of autism spectrum disorder vary from one child to another, but in general, they fall into two areas, namely social impairment, including difficulties with the social communication, and repetitive and stereotyped behaviors. There are certain common behaviors and features that tend to be more common among children with autism, and they serve as indicators of identifying autism. Let me sign off here and hope to see you in another session. Thank you.